Steve Cooper Rank Success, and this is another short video in the little series of Making It Brief, a series of little videos just around the aspect of the Sergeant Inspector, Chief Inspector's role around briefings. So the part of the role, the expectation of you to be able to deliver briefings effectively as part of your oral communication, and the link with that and how well you do it to communicate to leadership and trust. So the strong links between good communication and leadership and trust. So briefings are the way you get that across and can get that across, and certainly across and conveying these issues across to a promotion panel where you're having to deliver a structured briefing, or a briefing. They don't tell you to deliver a structured one necessarily. So the aspect of these videos is to help you start thinking through some options so that you don't walk into assessment centres and have to start reinventing the wheel when there's lots of good guidance available for you for free, hidden in plain sight, right under your nose, but that perhaps you might not put two and two together and think about taking into the process with you, or taking into your head, and to start working with some of these issues. So the first kind of video I did in this little sequence was an introduction to the aspect of briefing and its link to your role. The second video is around I Marched, which is a video, a briefing model in authorised professional practice on the College of Policing pages. The third video is around the second model, and that's around SAFCOM. That's called SAFCOM, and that's a briefing up model, so a slightly different way of briefing information. So this video today, this input, if you like, this conversation, this talking piece to camera, if you like, is around the NDM, using the National Decision Model as a briefing model. So I've talked about, I've alluded to, and I have focused on the NDM previously in YouTube videos and blogs and podcasts. And what I want to do today is just talk about it as a briefing model. Now, it can be used as a briefing model. It is used as a briefing model, and I know it's been used to brief in promotion processes successfully. Why? Because these are the conversations I have with people and say, well, how are you going to approach the task that you've got to deliver a briefing? And they'll say, well, I hadn't really given it much thought. I thought about doing this or this or this. And I say, well, tell me about some of the models that you might be considering. And people do not know. Not everybody knows. Understandably, perhaps, you're busy doing your job from day-to-day basis. Don't always know about formal briefing models. If you do, that's great. But as I find when I speak with people, particularly this side of a promotion selection process, it's certainly good to have a reminder. And that's what this is about. So the NDM as a briefing model. So if you remember on our March video, it starts with information. Well, so does the NDM. So starting at that point seems logical. So here's your task for your briefing. You'll have your instructions. So what information have you got to go on at the moment? So that's a good place to start. Those of you using the NDM all the time, repetitively on a day-to-day basis, will know that's the starting point. Gather, verify, analyse, check and assess information. So that's what you'll be doing, harvesting any information you've got to work with for a briefing. And then you start looking at the risks. So from the scenario, from the information you've got, what are the risks? How are you going to work through them? What's your plan, if you like? So what risks have you identified from that? How are you going to mitigate those, reduce, avoid, remove, accept, share or transfer them? So giving some thought to that. And then you move on to your powers and policy. Which powers and policy will you be using? What guidance do you have available? If you're going to step outside of that, why are you going to do that? How are you going to do that? And how are you going to back that up with your rationale and your thinking? What's your reasoning around that? And then you move on to consider your options and your contingencies. So spending some time to do that, and that may be part of your briefing when you lay it out on a flip chart or when you're talking through it. And then of course take action and review. What have you decided to do? So if you're delivering a briefing using the NDM, what is it that you've decided to do? What is your decision? What's the rationale around that? And How does that link to the values of the organisation? How is that congruent with the code of ethics? And you know, just thinking through the NDM as a briefing model. Not everybody does this, because most people are kind of preset to the NDM being a decision-making model, which it is an excellent decision-making model. So it's just making that little switch of mode, if you like, to think about the NDM. So when you walk in to a promotion selection process, you're not walking in with a blank sheet, with a blank brain. You're walking in with some options, some meaningful options for you to get stuck in to whatever scenario you've been given, or the task you've got, so that you can actually do the best you can and present the best version of yourself on the day. So if you're walking in now, this is the last video in this little series of videos that I've done on the aspect of briefing, so making it brief videos. If you can kind of work with those, and you walk into a assessment centre and you think, right, here's this scenario, okay, that's fairly straightforward. I think SAFCOM will fit that. It's a stakeholder briefing, brilliant. I'm going to use SAFCOM and it works really well. Now it might mean that you walk in, you've got a particularly complex scenario you've been given. You've got 45 minutes to prepare, and then you're going to go in and deliver a 10-minute briefing, and you're going to be asked questions on it for 10 minutes. So again, it's really useful to have some of these options to walk in with. So iMarch, SAFCOM, NDM, and to be able to work through it. So sometimes if you get given a complex scenario or information to work with, when I do sit down with people and work through it, and I've listened to people deliver briefings in practice or at rehearsal, if you like, to build confidence and to get familiar with it. So the more you practice and the more you deliver with briefings, and the important thing with this is the 10 minutes bit as well. It's actually really hard to prepare a 10-minute briefing. It's harder to prepare a 10-minute briefing than it is a 20 or a 30-minute briefing, because you've got to be on point. You know, you've got to practice and rehearse. I know plenty of people who use their phone, they use egg timers, cookery timers, so that bell goes off at 10 minutes until they've actually honed it to the point where, with a minute to go, they're ready to wrap up, and they do so quite powerfully. So when I've listened to people do that, we've gone through using whatever the model that's been used, so whether it's iMarch, SAFCOM, NDM, or some other amended model, and you'll see some of those in my digital toolkits for presentations and briefings. You can mix and match them. It doesn't have to be used in a particular model all the time, but you can borrow elements of them, so that when you walk in, you've got some contingencies to work through and use them to fit the scenario you're given. And if you're given a complex one, it might be that sometimes when I sit down with someone, I'll go, well, that's very good, the only dimension you've addressed is prevention. And they go, how do you mean? And we'll talk through it, and we go, well, look, you've got lots of options here to talk about prevention, detection in this scenario, enforcement, education. So you're just starting to open up some of the aspects around the briefing that you can deliver, so that when you're delivering it to the panel, you can think, right, I've got to go through these elements as well, so that I can demonstrate strategic thinking, broader thinking, which are the skills that are being looked for. And whatever the scenario or the competency being tested, you can start aligning your thoughts to that, and the model that you're using to structure your thoughts. And as I've alluded to previously, rather than briefing models as such, I quite like the aspect of you switching to them into thinking mode, to use them as thinking models rather than just briefing models. And that's where you can start begging and borrowing and choosing and mixing and matching them for any scenario. So once you become confident, once you know what these models are, and you're comfortable delivering a briefing along each of those structures, start mixing it up a bit. Because that gives you the confidence that when you walk into an assessment centre, whatever the scenario, whether it's a scenario you've got on paper, or whether it's just tell us how you're going to lead your teams as a newly promoted sergeant, how will you inspire confidence in your teams as a newly promoted inspector, how will you manage your resources effectively to maintain public confidence as a chief inspector, and any other variation of those questions you want. You can pick those questions out for yourself and brief to them. So and practice your briefing and rehearsal, and that 10 minutes is really important. So get it in on 10 minutes. Think about how you're going to split that down, whichever model you're using, so that you actually, because you sometimes get marked down for being significantly under or significantly over the 10 minutes. So always try and base it around that 10 minutes. The best way to do that is practice and rehearsal. Okay, so that's the NDM. Just think about that as an alternative model. So you've got some options now. And if you have a process approaching, as I know some of you do at the moment, there's some models, there's some food for thought for you to do, which is why I wanted to get those videos done quite quickly. And I wish you all the best, and I'll be back with another video in this series shortly. So thank you. Bye.